The statement of Kevin Whitley, or Whitley, is going to be read.
Whitley, sorry.
Whitley, I beg your pardon. And it's to be read by Margaret Melkie. So when you're ready.
The statement is amongst our documents, is it?
I beg your pardon?
The statement is amongst our documents.
Yes, it should be tab 6.
Do we tender it?
Yes.
If not, objection to one paragraph in that statement.
Can you just tell me which one it is?
44.
Sorry?
44. 44 was the last. I object to the whole statement except for the last thing.
So it's the first two sentences. Mr. Barrow, I think that might be beyond the witness's capacity to provide us with helpful assistance.
Yes, it's not pressed, John.
Not pressed. Very well. The first two sentences will be deleted from the statement. Yes, thank you.
When you're ready.
Should I begin? Okay.
Just from...
I will show you the Margaret statement is Exhibit 38.7. Yes.
So from paragraph 4, yes.
Okay, from 4.
Yes.
My full name is Kevin James Whitley and my date of birth is redacted 1953. I grew up in a normal middle-class family. I got married in 1979, but I am now divorced. My ex-wife and I have 4 children together. Abused by Philip Doyle. I first met Doyle in 1962 when I was about 8 years old. On my way home from school, I passed the Oatley Mentor Theatre. I saw Doyle renovating the theatre and I bugged him for a job. I started by helping with renovating the theatre, and over time I did every job in the theatre from sweeping to ushering to operating the projector. Doyle gave me gifts, including candy, a movie camera, and a projector. He also took me on outings. My family didn't have much money, so it was just fantastic. I was simply enchanted by Doyle, and he was like a big brother to me. Doyle proceeded to assault me many times over the years. Details of my abuse are set out in my first police statement dated 7th of April 2008, first statement. Doyle sexually abused me from the age of 8 until I was 16 years old. The assault mainly took place at Doyle's theatre in Oatley and Cogra, and at a house he was renovating in Cogra. I have carried numerous emotional scars throughout my life as a result of Doyle's abuse. It has affected my personal and family life, my career, and my finances. I questioned my sexuality as I didn't have the confidence to approach girls like my friends did. I have never been comfortable with sex and have felt sexually inadequate throughout my entire life. I've had to seek counselling for years to deal with the emotional scars I carry as a result of the abuse and disclosure of abuse. Doyle would often say words to the effect, "Don't tell anybody about this. It's our secret." I didn't want to tell anyone what had happened because I was ashamed, embarrassed, and scared about what people would say and do to me if I told them. As I got older, I buried all the memories of what Doyle did to me. After I married and had children of my own, I started to think about what could happen to my own children and wrestled with the thoughts of whether I should do something about Doyle's abuse. I decided I didn't want to do anything about it until my parents passed away. I didn't want them to be ashamed or to have the thoughts of them failing in their parental duties in the sense that they had failed to protect me. I didn't want to exacerbate their health problems by telling them. My mother died in 2003 and my father died in 2005. It was after my parents had passed away that I decided to do something about what Doyle did to me. My wife was the first person I told about Doyle's abuse in about 2002. Around 5 years later, I disclosed the abuse to my marriage counsellor. I didn't think I could live with myself to let Doyle get away with it. I decided that I owed it to myself to tell someone. It took a long while to get enough courage to report to the police. Reporting to police. On the 7th of April 2008, I went to Hurstville Police Station and reported Doyle's abuse. That was a really hard thing to do, as I felt it was like I wouldn't be believed. The constable handled it really well and arranged for me to talk to some detectives. I was introduced to Detective Senior Constable Lee, who was assigned to my case through the entire process. Detective Lee was empathetic, but the other detective was trying to find holes. I felt like I felt like he was testing me. This made me uneasy. The police made some inquiries and said there have been other complaints against Doyle, but nothing has happened because there's never been enough evidence. The attitude seemed to change a bit and they seemed to be more interested. It gave me some comfort to know that there were other victims to support my claims, but at the same time, I was sorry to hear that there were other victims. I was told not to talk to or to meet with the victims because it would compromise the case. I didn't know anything about the stories of the other victims. Over the next few weeks, I provided my first statement. It was very emotional giving a statement and I broke down on many occasions. The process took a long time as Detective Lee had to verify all details I had given him. I was very comfortable with Detective Lee, who was a young detective, and given his age, I thought the way he conducted himself was amazing. Police investigation. At some stage, Detective Lee asked me if I would be prepared to meet with Doyle for the purpose of trying to get Doyle to corroborate my statement and ultimately to get a confession from Doyle. Detective Lee discussed the process in detail with me and that I would have to wear a listening device. I agreed to do it and the police started conducting surveillance of Doyle. In total, I had 4 face-to-face conversations with Doyle that were covertly recorded. The police debriefed with me after each session. Detective Lee explained the value of the evidentiary material I collected and told me that what we needed to get from Doyle in the next meeting. I found this difficult because I despise Doyle. I had to put a mask on and feign happiness when I met him. Prior to my last meeting with Doyle, I told Detective Lee that I was an emotional wreck and that I wouldn't be able to meet Doyle again. Detective Lee arranged for me to see a psychologist. I ultimately agreed to meet Doyle one final time. Overall, this process made me feel I was an intricate part of the investigation. At the conclusion of the covert recordings, the police completed their brief of evidence and arrested Doyle. In August 2009, Doyle was charged with about 74 charges involving 7 complainants. I watched his arrest on the Channel 10 News. Detective Lee kept me updated throughout the court proceedings. He told me about the mentions and bail hearings, which I still don't completely understand. He maintained carriage of my matter throughout the entire court process. I can't recall precisely when I first met with anyone from the DPP, but I was briefed about the trial during a meeting at the DPP office with the prosecutor and a couple of assistants. When the DPP became involved, a support person was allocated to me. She came to a number of mentions, but by this stage I already had a lot of support from my family and a psychologist I was seeing at the time that specialised in child sexual abuse. In about 2011, the DPP decided that they were going to split the trial in two. I had no input into this decision. I was just told it was happening. I was told charges relating to me and one other victim would be heard together in one trial, and charges in relation to the other 5 victims would be heard together in a second trial. I was told that the reason for this was based on the time of the abuse. I was also told that the laws had changed and the DPP didn't want to complicate it and confuse the jury. Initially, I was told that my trial would take place after the trial of the other 5 victims. However, this trial of the 5 victims... Sorry, I lost my place. I just start from 24. Initially, I was told that my trial would take place after the trial of the other 5 victims. However, this trial of the 5 victims took place and resulted in a hung jury. A retrial was ordered in relation to those 5 victims. I was subsequently advised by the DPP that my trial would now commence before their retrial. My first trial. In about late 2011, Doyle's first trial commenced in relation to the charges involving me and a second complainant. Prior to the trial, someone took me through the courtroom and explained the layout. The DPP said to me before the trial started, "Be honest and tell your story." I was given the option of giving evidence in the courtroom or via video link. I chose to give evidence in the courtroom as I wanted to face Doyle. The trial started and I spent a day giving evidence and being cross-examined by the defence lawyer. After the first day, there was a mistrial because of the conflict of interest with one of the jurors. I was told there would be a new trial. My second trial, in late April 2012, my new trial commenced. Doyle had all his supporters in the court and this was very confronting. I was cross-examined for over a day by Doyle's defence lawyer. His line of reasoning was that I never worked for Doyle and that I was a troublesome kid that simply hung around the theatre. As there was no corroborative witnesses at my trial, there was nothing to refute this. The DPP failed to gain any statements from my sisters and school friends to support the evidence that I worked for Doyle in the theatre. At the end of the day that I finished giving evidence, I had a brief meeting with the prosecution team and they told me that I'd done well. During the course of the hearing, a number of charges against Doyle were dropped. I didn't know why they were dropped. It would have been nice to know which charges were dropped and why. Ultimately, Doyle was acquitted on all charges. I was very upset and disappointed, as was Detective Lee. I had a discussion with the DPP after the trial and they were very upset and apologetic. However, they didn't say much about why Doyle hadn't been convicted and why they didn't get the statements from my family and friends to corroborate my story. Hearing all the rhetoric from lawyers that it's not a perfect system, but it's the only system we have, was frustrating and angered me greatly. Second joint trial involving the other 5 complainants. In mid-2012, Doyle's second trial in relation to the other 5 victims took place. Doyle was found guilty of all 38 counts. I had no involvement in this trial, but Detective Lee and the DPP liaison person kept me up to date with the proceedings. I attended a couple of days of the trial and the verdict, where I finally met the other victims. We went out to celebrate after the verdict. In August 2012, Doyle was sentenced. I attended the sentencing hearing along with some of the other victims. I was upset that I couldn't provide a victim impact statement, even though I knew that I wasn't a victim under the law because Doyle had been acquitted of charges involving me. Before delivering the sentence, the judge spent hours describing to the court how vile Doyle was. How serious the charges were against him, and how the sum total of all 38 charges were well over 100 years. I was completely baffled as to how the judge could then turn around. Hang on, I can't say. Could turn around and sentence Doyle to a maximum of 7 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 4 years and 6 months. The judge ordered many of Doyle's sentences to be served concurrently. Again, I was confounded by this concept. Concurrent sentencing suggests that the law views the rape of one victim or a dozen victims the same. It simply made no sense to me and had no basis in logic. The victims were not happy with the sentence, and we told the DPP that it was completely inadequate. Soon after the sentencing hearing, Detective Lee told me that Doyle was going to appeal his conviction. I was so upset with this and the lenient sentence Doyle had received that I contacted Ray Hadley of radio station 2GB. Mr. Hadley interviewed me and another victim. And then spoke with the then Premier Barry O'Farrell, who promised to look into the matter. I believe it was a result of this lobbying that the DPP decided to appeal Doyle's sentencing. I didn't really understand the appeal process and would have liked to have been explained to me more. Fortunately, Doyle's appeal of his conviction was dismissed and the DPP succeeded on its appeal of Doyle's sentencing. This meant that Doyle's sentence was increased by 2 years. I still don't think the sentence was adequate, but it was better than nothing. Impact of the criminal justice system. Reporting to the police was a relief because I was able to tell a story after such a long period of time. Initially, it was about bringing Doyle to justice. I didn't want him to continue with his life of impunity. Over time, it became more important to do it for me so that I was able to heal and grow. Telling my story was the first step. I was aware that the timing of the offending was a key factor in splitting the trials, but it was also an insurance policy. I have mixed emotions about this. In one way, I'm thankful that the trials were split. If there was only one trial and Doyle was found not guilty, it would have been game over. Having split the trials meant that even though we lost the first trial, at least Doyle was convicted in the second trial. On the other hand, if Doyle had been convicted after a single trial for 7 victims, then the sentence probably would have been greater because it was a greater number of victims over a longer period of time. It disappoints me that the juries in both trials didn't get to hear about the additional victims. The entire process was very confronting. It was long and it was really painful at times. I was disappointed that Doyle was acquitted in my trial, and even more disappointed with the pathetically lenient sentence handed down in the second trial. Recommendations to the Commission. I want the system changed to one that seeks the truth, rather than an adversarial system where it comes down to how good a barrister you can afford and or the efficacy of the DPP or lack thereof. The French system, as an inquisitorial system, focuses on finding the truth. I know there are positives and negatives of both systems, but maybe there is some middle ground. The trial was the culmination of years of anxiety, knowing that one way or another it was going to be over. I don't think the DPP as an organisation handled me very well. The actual people I met were nice enough, but I was in the dark about a lot of things. And I was obviously disappointed with the lack of engagement with me. I would have liked to have had more involvement in the process. The system is very closed shop and mystical. More disclosure of information in layman's terms throughout the process about the timeframes and what and why things were happening would have helped. Sentencing is ridiculous. There is no consistency. When Doyle was convicted in the second trial, his original sentence was a maximum of 7 years, with parole after 4 years and 6 months. Doyle sexually assaulted 5 children. Let's call this for what it is. Many of the sexual assaults were rape, the rape of children. He was convicted of all 38 charges. If the judge had ordered the sentence for each separate charge to be served cumulatively, the total sentence would have been over 100 years. I do not understand the logic behind concurrent sentencing. I work in business. If someone buys 100 of something from me, they get a discount. It appears that the same logic applies in criminal law. So if I'm going to rape someone, I may as well rape 10 women because I'm still going to get the same sentence. Concurrent sentencing is illogical and is not a deterrent. Around the same time of Doyle's sentencing, a man was sentenced to more time for fraud charges. This just doesn't make sense. It appeared to me from this example, that the law values money and property more highly than children. Redacted. It is my hope that my statement may encourage more victims to come forward and keep this serial paedophile locked up for life. I wish to convey a message of encouragement. I wish to convey a message of encouragement, hope and inspiration to the vast sea of silent victims out there. I have discovered as a result of my own journey through this process that it is vitally important for victims to tell their story for their own benefit, even if doing so does not result in the prosecution of the predator. It marks the beginning of the journey of recovery and growth. With support and expert help and treatment, it is possible for victims to recognise and repair the emotional scars they have carried throughout their lives so that they can lead a normal and happy life. Finally, I wish to raise awareness of the scourge on our society that is child sexual abuse. I wish to break down the barriers of taboos around this subject so that people can talk openly and honestly about it every action that a person takes speaking about and exposing pedophiles creates a small ripple. That ripple flows onto others, and this ripple effect eventually creates a tsunami of change. The current Royal Commission is a testament to that. To this. 8 years ago, when I first went to the police, there wasn't a lot of publicity on the subject of child sexual abuse and pedophilia. Yet today, we can all sense a groundswell of change. And it is vital that we must all take responsibility for protecting our kids. That's Kevin Whitley's statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reading Mr. Whitley's statement to us.